Women in particular, on the business side, a lot of them struggle with delegation. They want to kind of manage everything. And so that would be the big one on the business side. As it relates to the marriage side, I would actually say the biggest thing that I see is that if they don't really feel like they've got a partner at home, if there is one common line I hear with a lot of women is, I don't have a partner. I don't hear a partner. And this is also interesting, Mindy, with like women that make more than their husbands or their partner. And a lot of sometimes the husbands will be like, I don't make as much, or I'm like, they don't really care about that. They like a lot of women, most women certainly that I work with, I find they don't really care about whether or not people are bringing in the same amount of money. What they do care about is their sense of partnership. Is there a really great sense of a division of labor, so that, that husbands and wives are really working as a team, that, that's very clear in terms of with what they're each working on and how they're kind of contributing. And when they have that sense of partnership, then all of a sudden they just feel a lot better. And because I think what happens is that, again, in business, we're kind of giving, or professionally we're giving. But if we come home and that relationship is not energizing for us, it kind of depletes us.
Right.
Or we feel like, okay, great, now I have to take care of that person. Like they're my husband. Talk about a major turnoff. Like that is going to completely, really impact that relationship. So I really encourage anybody listening, if you're in a relationship, focus on, how are we doing as a team? Like, how are we doing in terms of, how are we doing as a team in terms of our vision? So like, as you know how I work, with businesses, I get them to kind of think about what's the vision that you have for your organization. And then let's kind of get all the people lined up and clarify their roles to kind of, really accelerate that vision. But I want couples to do the exact same thing. What is the vision that you have as a couple? And have you kind of really figured out your system on the marriage side, so that there's a real sense of partnership, so that as a unit, you can actually achieve your vision. And a lot of people just don't do that.
What I'm just thinking is you could do that in everything.
Yes.
So I'm wondering if the typical approach to our life is, okay, this is my career, or this is my business.
Yep.
I'm going to pour my heart and soul into it. Then when we step out of that, now we're looking at the other parts of our life, and we're naturally gravitating to the parts that energize us. But I would be curious, as I'm listening to you talk, I'm thinking, maybe it energizes us because we have a vision for it.
Yes.
And so would it be helpful to of course I would say it would be helpful to have a vision for your health. Would it be helpful to have a vision for your friendships? And I'm going to ask you a really interesting question about friendships here in a moment. You have a vision for your marriage? So now when you step into that container and you go out of the container of work and you go into these other containers, they too feel like there's an energy to them as opposed to just they're happening.
100%. And I love, love, love the way that you clarify that. It's like the containers, and we're like tapping into it. So what's the vision for each of these different containers? Okay, that's the first part. Get clarity of the vision, because without the vision, we don't know what we're saying yes or no to. And then this is really, really important in each of these buckets to have a system, not to get too technical, but this is really important. What is your system and your task that you need to be doing so that you can actually achieve your vision? So in business, right, as you know, in business, we have to have, what's the vision? Then what are the tasks and the cadences that we have to making sure that we're in alignment with the vision? The same thing happens with couples and marriages. Have the vision, but then what are your systems that you need to have in place so that you can actually, so that it's easy, right? When there's a cadence and there's a rhythm, it's like, okay, we have a flow. We've got a flow right now. Like I know when laundry's getting done. I know when grocery shopping is getting done. I know because my husband and I have figured out one of the groups I was speaking at. They're like, Karyn, you need to do like a one pager on SOPs for dummies. It was a bunch of husbands actually, and I thought that was like so good. I don't have it yet. I've got to create it. So, but I thought that was really interesting, like SOP systems for couples. Because if we don't have a system, isn't it great? Because if we don't have a system, it's very chaotic. It's like, what do we have for dinner? I don't know. Like, are you going to pick up that? It's very chaotic. That's what happens. If you don't have a system to match your vision, life is very chaotic. And then
energy draining.
Yes. And it drains all the energy, so that all of a sudden people say, I can't even think about what to make for dinner. I can't even think. It's like all of their best energy has been used up based on this chaos. Yeah. But if you have a clear vision and then you have a system that is this rhythm that you know kind of when things are going to happen, it becomes this flow, and that's going to give you and save you enormous amount of time and energy. And that's why people ask me all the time, how do I have so much energy? I am like super into this. Like, but I have finessed it, and I watch it, and I you know, and as I'm in perimenopause, like I'm like, oh, this is like different. Okay, I gotta change up my algorithm. My algorithm is a little bit different right now. My emotional algorithm is like, oh, this is like really different than 2 years ago. And so you have to be really aware and keep your eye on it. But then once you do, you're going to have energy left over.
You know, so this really well segues into the energy system of friendship. So and I'm curious your thoughts on this, because one of the balancing act that I've had for 25 years has been my career, my family, my parenting, my spouse, my friends, and my health. And it's like sort of like that's what I've been balancing. Right. And I've sometimes picked friends that I would call are situational friends. They're friends because our kids hung out together, or they were friends because they were a neighbor and they were just really easy to grab, or we had some kind of situation that has brought us together. Right. Well, recently I was actually listening or reading an article in the New York Times, and it was saying that we have the capacity for about 150 relationships at one time. And it categorized them according to the top tier, middle tier, and then the bottom tier was like acquaintances. Right. And it said that the top tier, like your besties, max you can get 5. More than 5. And now it's a lot of energy to keep those relationships where they were. Middle tier, you could have like 15. These are like the soccer mom on the side of the soccer game that, like, you know, you happen to see on Saturdays, or maybe somebody at your yoga class that you see all the time. And then everybody else is a bottom tier. What do you, and then the article actually went on to say, should you go and tell the middle tier people they're middle tier people?
No, that you don't, definitely not. Don't tell them. That's your own private dialogue. Yeah, right.
But I've never thought to categorize my friendships that way. So, and now as I'm looking through the work-life balance eyes and the life of the energy balance lens, I'm thinking there's some truth to this, that I can only put so much energy into so many friendships before it starts to become a drain. Right. So what do you think of that?
I love it. And I've seen an article similar like that about maybe 10 years ago. And I think maybe that's when I started to do it, around these different tiers, you know, and it's interesting because people can move up and down those tiers. Right. And so when I think about,
that's what they said.
Yeah. And so when I think about my top tier, those are people that I know what my value system is, and they meet all the values. So tier 1 and 2 for me, there is a complete alignment of value system. There's 100% alignment of what my top values are. There's an alignment. Tier 3 for me, they might have like 3 of the 5. I focus on 5 values. They might have like 3 of the 5, but they may not have all of them. But the third tier is more like community. So like the first tier is like inner circle, and then the second tier is kind of like exactly as you said, kind of like your close people that you would share a lot with, but in the bottom tier is kind of more like it's your community, so to speak. But it doesn't have so much to do with necessarily how often you talk about it. It's the depth of the relationship that really kind of makes a difference. And so it definitely is, and I think for anybody again who's a health professional in a job where you're giving, you become even more protective around who is going to be in that kind of like that top tier. Top tier. Yeah. And all you have to do is ask yourself, when you're with that person, do you feel energized? Because that top tier, and I'd say top 1 and 2, do you feel energized because that's what you gotta really protect those places. And my husband and I talk about this actually all the time. And And he said he calls this third tier almost like it's a little bit. People ebb and flow from it. It could be like people in your community, like the school moms or the soccer moms, or your neighbors that are it's close by. You really enjoy being with them, but they're more of your community. Would you go and fly to go see them for a weekend if they move away? Probably not, right? Like so you enjoy them, but there's not as much of an investment. By top 1 and 2, there's more of an emotional time and energy investment.
What do you do? One friendship that I'm very careful to not completely engage in, and it's very common for women, is the trauma bonding or the bitching bonding, where you are bitching about husbands or you're bitching about other women, or and you could almost feel energized from that. But I have found that I've had to move away from some of those toxic relationships because I didn't like who I was becoming in them. I didn't want to be that complainer. So I think I want to just touch on that for a hot moment, because I think as women, we should be really careful how we lift each other up, and that we don't lift each other up through this toxic behavior, because that could be energizing too.
Yeah, and it depends. I find people who blame and complain extremely draining. Like if there's two things that I find really draining in relationships, it's small talk. I find small talk really draining, and I find people who complain or play the victim really draining. It's kind of like,
me too.
It's like, and it's not that, so when I think about the people that I love and cherish, it's not that everybody has like these perfect lives. Everybody's got issues and problems. But what I find so energizing is when I have a friend that is, if they're going through a really difficult time, they're processing it and they're sharing, but their focus, Mindy, is on, this is where I'm at. I got to figure out what I need to do differently. The focus is not on bitching about it. It's forward focus. And then so all of a sudden our conversation becomes still, and it's not toxic positivity where we're just kind of like glossing over, what they're feeling. It's like you let the person still sit with that feeling, because that's really important. And then it's like shifting gears in a car. All of a sudden, then they kind of shift into kind of like, what do I need to do different so that I can kind of get myself into a new place? I find that so energizing when I talk with my friends about, right? It's kind of, it's hopeful, it's optimistic. So what's often tricky with friendships, certainly with women, is that as we evolve and we get healthier, and hopefully emotionally healthier, physically healthier, spiritually healthier, as we get healthier, all of a sudden, we're going to start looking at our relationships differently. Because
we'll be less tolerant of the toxic ones.
We'll be less tolerant. And so I see that with a lot of people that I work with, that as they get healthier, and whether or not that it's in their business, in their marriage, whatever it is, as they're getting healthier and more clear, all of a sudden they can sometimes go through a little bit of a season of loneliness, because they're like, ugh. Who am I hanging it out with? I'm not jiving with them anymore. Or maybe as somebody has more success, this is huge, all of a sudden that friend is jealous. I was just actually watching Oprah recently. She was on she did this interview with Gail, and they were interviewing somebody else. I forget who it was. And she basically said,
I saw it. It was
who was it?
It was Melinda Gates.
Yeah.
It was
exactly.
Melinda Gates.
Yeah, and
I saw that.
You saw that. And how she talked about saying you cannot be friends with somebody who's jealous. All of a sudden, if you don't, right? So is somebody, and again, this is something that I see a lot. If women are kind of becoming more successful, however you define that, let's say in their career, externally successful, there are going to be some friends that are so happy for you. They're like, wow. And then there's other friends that are like,
yes,
that's interesting. And that they're not happy for you. And so all of a sudden there's going to be a disconnect. And so there tends to be, as people are becoming more externally successful, there can be a real disconnect and sometimes a little bit of grieving that actually happens, going, oh, like sadness, actually. So it feels like a grief that all of a sudden maybe friends that we thought were for us, they're not really for us. And that is really, that is a really upsetting feeling for it, right? Because like, who have I been investing into? And so sometimes there has to be that pause going, okay, this is part of this is part of life. This is part of growing pains. I'm allowed to feel sad about this. And I also now want to be really intentional about who do I want to spend time with? What are the values that I want to look for in friendships, and who is a really good match? And then being intentional, putting your little system together, being intentional to making sure you're leaving time for that friend. Because the thing about friendship is that you do need to spend time.
You need time.
You need time.
Yeah.
You may not need a ton of time, and the really great friends, you don't need a ton of time, but it goes deep. You know, you laugh and you cry. Yeah. That to me is like a sign of a really great friend. When you can kind of have that range of emotions and you know that they have your back and that they want nothing more than for you to be successful and cheering for you. Yeah. But that can be a real shift for sure.